Hi, I'm Stephen Talamy. A couple of videos ago I showed you how I'd started to incorporate the Roland JV1080 into my workflow. Now I don't have a huge amount of outboard equipment, in fact most of what I do is always in the box. But I do have a small modular system, and I thought today, as a sort of modular fun day, I would see if I could get that linked up to Logic and create a sort of hybrid modular workflow. So let's look at the setup I've got here. So on the left here we've got the ES-3. So this is coming in from a light pipe, so out of my sound card into here, and I've got the 8 channels here. And then I've got the ES-6, which is doing the same thing in reverse. So these are 6 inputs from the modular that can go out of this light pipe and into my audio interface. In my case, I'm using the Focusrite Scarlett 18i20. So let's give this a try out here. We've got the Mrs. Mills piano, which has just come from Spitfire Audio, recorded at Abbey Road Studio, very famous piano. So a really nice bright tone. So what I want to do now is try and get this through my modular system and back in again. There's lots of ways I could do that, sending this out through a bus and various other ways. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the I/O plugin. So this is under Utilities, I/O, and I'm going to send it via stereo. So let's pick the output. I've labeled all my outputs up nicely so I can see this is the ES-3 ports 1 and 2. So I'm going to go out through that, and then I want to come back in through port 1 and 2 on the ES-6. Now you might have noticed almost straight away we've actually got some sort of strange noise going on here. So actually this is a DC offset, and thanks to Oz from Expert Sleepers who explained this to me. So there's just this DC offset that we need to remove. There's lots of ways of doing that. I'm going to use what is available in the Dynamics. There's this adaptive limiter, and if I put this on, you can see I can remove the DC offset. I'm not going to have any gain, no output, very fast attack. So you can see there's the input to this, and now it's cleared that DC offset. I could also use maybe an EQ to do the same sort of thing, but this will do for now. So if I play now, well, there's no sound, but what we can see is that on the ES-3 we are getting the lights. So let's now wire that up. I'm going to use these pink cables for that. So going out of 1, and we're going to send it into here. We've got the Expert Sleepers disting, so I'm going to send that on the input. Same with number 2, and then we're going to take the outputs here, which are A and B, and send them back in. And you'll see here I'm using the L1, which is a reverb that is built into the disting. It's got loads and loads of functions, but this will give us a good test out of this. So let's give this a try with a play. So let's hear it without the effect. Now let's turn it on. And I think we can probably whack this up a little bit bigger. So it's a nice juicy big haul. The dry signal, and now sending it through the disting. So I'm going to wire up a second module here. This is actually a clone of the Mutable Instruments Clouds, so a classic module here. I've got it in a slightly smaller form factor, which works for my small rack here. So again, I'm going to wire that in. So I'm going to go out from 3 into the input of the Clouds. Similarly, because we're going in stereo, 4, and then all the way back out again. So let's just get these 2 fellas back. Great, so now we have that all nicely wired up. Let's just switch the output here now from 3 and 4, 3 and 4, and let's try playing this through the Clouds. So there's the dry sound. And one of the fun things we can do here is fiddle about with the pitch. Which doesn't sound great, not particularly musical, but what about if we want to control that pitch using some sort of tonal source? So if we zoom out a little bit, you can see I've actually got a Behringer Crave here. So this can provide me with a pitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wire, I'm going to go from the keyboard CV out, which is going to give me the pitch. I'm going to wire that in to the volts per octave here on the clouds. So now what I can do is I can press the buttons here on the keypad of the Behringer and have them control the pitch control via the volts per octave. So let's just hear, let's push it down here. Let's hear what that sounds like. So that pitch is actually quite nice. I can send it up an octave. Or I can send it down an octave. What is quite interesting is if I go for a fifth. Let's play with this last module here. This is from Happy Nerding. It is the FX Aid XL. So this is a multi-effects unit. I'm going to wire it up same way as I did before. We're going to take these grey cables and we're going to go out of the expert sleepers and into it. So now we should be able to send this through there. So I'm going to switch again my output now, 5 and 6, and back in through 5 and 6. So that's obviously a very Big Sky influenced sound. Now there's lots of really interesting other effects here on the FX Aid. So let's just have a look at some of the other options here. What I'm interested to do is see if I can control this unit using not CV, but MIDI CC. So can I use my MIDI CC controller that I would normally be using for controlling, say, expression and modulation? So can I use that to wire up and control this? Let's see what we can do here. So I'm going to switch to a different patch here. Right, so now we have a string patch loaded up. This is from the Albion Neo range. And you can see I'm controlling the expression and dynamics with my mod wheels here. So that's great. I would love to be able to send the same information out into my modular rig. So let's have a look at how we can do this. Actually, Reaktor has this thing called Blocks that allows you to do some modular stuff. And actually the version that I'm using here actually comes in the free edition of Complete. So if we just create another software instrument track. So we've got Reaktor here. We're going to create a new patch here with the rack information. I don't want any of these things here. All I want is the in and out. There are a range of things here that you get in this block space, which is just all we need actually for this. So what I want are these macro knobs. So this is actually going to allow me to create effectively a control voltage based on some sort of input. So that's going to be really useful. What I'm also going to do is grab a couple of VCAs. The reason I want these here is that it just means that I'm going to have a little bit more fine control over the outputs of these. So you can see it like as an attenuverter. So let's wire this up. We're going to send number 1 out into the VCA, and then we're going to send the output of that into the output 1. And we need to make sure we're sending this to the right destination. So I want this not to go to the stereo out. I want this to go out. I've got one more output I can choose on the ES-3, the 7 and 8. So we're going to send this out through 7 and 8. And let's also wire similarly the output here to the input of the VCA and out through the output here. Let's maybe just tidy this up a little bit here, just so it looks a bit nicer. Okay, so this is all very well. If I now move these around, we will get some output. I need to crank this up, the VCAs on both of these. And now I can get some control voltages. Now what's great here is now I can actually do a MIDI CC learn on these two knobs. So if I right click it, MIDI OCS learn, so let's just move that about. So that is me now moving one of my faders, and now do the same here. And I am now controlling those. So now I'm actually able to control, and you can see here, you can see that it is creating those control voltages and sending them out of the unit. And if you look here on the ES-3, you can see those control voltages are coming through. It's lighting up the lights there. And of course, as I mentioned, I can also control those a little bit if I want to attenuate that, so that when I'm going to the top of the throw, I can attenuate that so that it doesn't create as much control voltage. I'm going to leave those up at 100 for now, and we can always tweak them later. So this is great. I now am able to control these two together, but I'd like this to happen so that when I am using the MIDI instrument, I want this to get controlled at the same time. And again, there's a whole bunch of different ways in which I can achieve this same thing. What I'm going to do is I am going to wire it up using the MIDI environment, but the other option I could use is create a track stack for this. So I'm just going to use the MIDI environment for this. So let's get this out of the way. So inside the MIDI environment, you can see that we have the Reaktor Blocks and we have the Albion Neo strings. Those are the two channels. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to send the MIDI from Albion Neo strings into Reaktor. So it means that when I am now selecting this track here, it will also send the same MIDI information through to this. So let's bring both of those up. So we've now got Reaktor on screen and Albion, and I'm going to select Neo strings. And now, as you see, as I move my mod wheel, you can see I'm controlling both the dynamics here of the Albion and the expression, and the same things are happening here on the Reaktor. So the same, they're both moving together, and you can see also on the ES-3, you can see also the same things are happening. We've got the outputs going there. So this is great. Let's have a listen to this, but I think I want a slightly different patch to do this. I want something that's going to make some sense to wire this up. So I'm going to pick here, there is a delayed comb filter here. So to do the settings on here, there's various banks and various effects. So I'm just going to look for something in bank 1. So this is the delay comb filter that I actually want to run this through. So let's just listen to that on its own. Right, so this is the raw sound. Let's turn on the send into the FX aid. So just as before, I can fiddle about with the knobs. But now I want to see if I can do the same things using MIDI CC to control voltage. So I'm going to use the white cable to go out of 7, and I'm going to send that to this here into the 2. And I'm going to take this black cable and I'm going to send it in to number 3 here. So this is the moment of truth. Hopefully now, as I changed my mod wheel, we'll find that it's going to both control the dynamics and expression of the Albion Neo strings, and it's also going to send CV out to affect the output. So let's have a little play. So just to hear the difference with and without the voltage control on this, so I'm going to actually turn these off. So this is the difference. As I move the dynamics, you'll hear the strings changing. But now if I put these back on again and start controlling those two parameters on the FX aid, you can hear that the effect is getting more pronounced. So there's one more little experiment that I wanted to do here, and that is there's a clockable option within the FX Aid. So I'm just going to unplug these for a second. So that is in bank 1. So this is a clockable, and I think control 1 voltage allows me to send in a clock to this. So let's go back to back to the Mrs. Mills piano. Now what would be really nice is to have this also clocked so that the output followed what was on the clock of my MIDI. So as I changed the tempo, we could have the right things going on here. Now, how do I want that to work? Well, this again is where I'm going to use the Crave to help me out. So there are ways in which we can send the MIDI clock into the Crave. So looking down here at the Crave, we've got a number of different options, and having looked at the manual, there's some weird combination of shift and hold and reset and various buttons that allow me to configure what's going to come through the input. And what I want to do is I want to be able to get some stuff out of this assign option here. So you can actually assign different things through this control voltage, and one of them is to route some of your MIDI information through that assign, and that's what I want to do. I actually want to send the clock of this and assign it out through and then be able to use it in the rest of the modular setup. So that's a bit of a pain in the butt. Fortunately, Behringer actually have another application to help us with this, and this is called Synth Tribe. So because the Crave has a USB, I can actually talk to it directly, which is pretty fantastic. And so this is the clock source. I can decide where the clock is going to be, so it can have its own internal clock, or it can actually get its clock from either from the DIN input, which is where I'm going to send it, or to the MIDI USB, which obviously gets the USB as well. And as I mentioned, the assign value, so this assign output, it can have a whole bunch of things. It can have MIDI CC information, so this would have been another way of sending MIDI CC out and creating a control voltage, but we can also assign it to the sequencer clock. So that's what I'm going to do. So having done that, that's actually sent the commands directly to the Crave, which is really good. I don't have to fiddle about in its menus. Actually, there's a lot of other things here, fun stuff here. So you can even program the whole sequencer here inside of this application. So you don't even need to figure out these buttons here, which I think is really quite impressive for this synth. What we want to do is be able to start sending that MIDI information and the start-stop information through to the Crave. So at the moment, nothing has happened when I hit play on the Logic session. Nothing is actually going out. So we need to get our MIDI routing correct here. So here we're going to go into MIDI preferences. We're going to look at sync, and then we're going to set up the settings for the project. So you can see here I don't have any sync stuff set up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select to the Crave. I want to send a clock signal. That's all I need to send through to it. Now if I hit play, we will see that immediately the Crave is starting to flash, it's starting to do its sequencing, and if I hit stop, off we go. So that is pretty fantastic. We now actually have a MIDI synchronization between my Logic session, and I can try moving the tempo around as well. So let's move the tempo up or down, and we can see that it is responding really nicely now to tempo changes. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the assign out, which is coming from the MIDI clock now, and I'm actually going to send it to the built-in mult that is inside of the Crave so that I can have a couple of copies, and I'm going to send one of those mults out into the advanced clock of the DFAM. So if we put that into run mode, we can see it's not running yet, but as soon as I hit play, we find that it is moving in pace with the MIDI that is coming in here, and now we can see that we're actually getting a true clock out. I can adjust the speeds in the MIDI world, and we can see that both are tracking together really nicely, so that is good. So now the whole aim of this game was to see if we could control the delay of this. So let's take a cable, and we're going to take the other mult out of that clock, and we're going to send it into input 1, and let's see if any of this works. I'm just going to put on the metronome. So we can see that we are now clocking that delay based on the host tempo of the sequencer. It certainly has been fun looking at how I could create this hybrid type of workflow and thinking a little bit differently about how I bring these two worlds together. What modular equipment do you have that helps you work part in the box and part out of the box? And what tips and tricks do you have for connecting them together? Let me know your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, then please do give it a thumbs up, share and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.